Baleroc is always up for a good challenge. Unfortunately, for him to get one, he'd have to level up some more and spend a little more time at the gym. Your raid has come prepared, and no matter how many times he begs your tank to 1v1 him, the 24 other players just won't back down. Baleroc is a one-phase fight. This mostly static DPS check centers around coordinated healing rotations. Baleroc has around 100 million HP and does not spawn any adds. You'll want to bring 1 to 2 tanks, 5 to 6 healers, and a balanced mix of DPS. Let's see what he does. For starters, Baleroc will occasionally afflict his main aggro target with Blades of Glory, increasing their max HP and damage taken by 20%. This effect will stack continuously throughout the fight. Each time he does this, Baleroc will gain a stack of Incendiary Soul, increasing his fire damage dealt by 20%. Throughout the fight, Baleroc will empower one of his blades with Shadow or Fire energy. Shadow will grant him Decimation Blade. This causes his melee attacks to deal shadow damage equal to 90% of the target's health. Empowering his blades with Fire will grant him Inferno Blade. This will cause his attacks to deal no physical damage but do high fire damage instead. As this happens, Baleroc will continuously spawn Shards of Torment. The player that stands closest to the shard will be targeted by it and afflicted with Torment, taking increasing shadow damage every second. Once the crystal stops focusing the player, they will be left with the Tormented debuff, increasing their shadow damage taken greatly and reducing the healing that they can do. If nobody is near the crystal, it will instead pulse for high AoE shadow damage to the entire raid with its Wave of Torment. Healing players who are afflicted with Torment will grant the healer Vital Spark. This buff stacks multiple times and triggers if the player heals a target with the Blaze of Glory buff. Once triggered, Vital Spark will turn into Vital Flame and grant the player significantly increased healing to targets with the Blaze of Glory buff. The idea of the fight is actually quite simple. The tank damage and health go up throughout the fight, and to make up for this, healers gain a buff that increases their healing done. They will gain this buff by healing players who are focused by crystals. Unfortunately, not many players can take crystals very long or they will inevitably be killed. So in order to make sure the crystal is always being taken and not pulsing on the raid, players will need to take turns on rotating on them. Additionally, in order to give all the healers the proper buff, they will need to rotate as well. This means there are 2 basic rotations to worry about before even proceeding with the fight: the crystal rotation and the healer rotation. The healer rotation is quite simple. Split your healers into 2 teams of 2. Extra healers will be in charge of covering wherever they are needed, but will mostly just heal tanks. One pair of healers will alternate healing the melee crystal, while the other pair of healers will alternate healing the ranged crystal. In order to gain the needed amount of stacks and significantly increase healing, healers will heal for 2 crystals before switching. This means one healer will heal 2 full crystals while their partner heals the tank. Then they will switch roles for the next 2 crystals. The crystal rotations are somewhat more complex. Because of the Tormented debuff and the stacking shadow damage from Torment itself, players will need to rotate between crystals and during crystals. 6 players will rotate between the melee crystals and 6 players will rotate between the ranged crystal. Put these players in groups of 2 to alternate on each crystal. This works out so that each crystal is focused by 2 players. Here is the basic rotation. Crystal A spawns and is picked up by the first player in the rotation. Halfway through this crystal, player 2 will take the rest of the crystal. After it despawns, Crystal B will spawn and player 3 will take it, followed by player 4. When Crystal C spawns, player 5 and 6 in the rotation will handle it, and the pattern repeats after this. The rotation will need to be performed for the melee and ranged crystal throughout the fight. Throughout the fight, Baleroc will empower his swords with Decimation Blade and Inferno Blade. These are healing intensive parts of the encounter. Because Decimation Blade deals damage equal to 90% of the tank's health, healers will need to work hard to keep the tanks up. Tanks must be topped off between decimation strikes to stay alive. This is where healers should blow throughput cooldowns to provide their biggest heals possible. Alternatively, Inferno Blade is where healers should use their damage reduction cooldown. Since this does not do a flat percentage of the tank's health, the damage can be prevented with spells like Divine Sack or Pain Suppression. Once the mechanics are understood, the fight really is quite simple. Players must keep up their rotations while being ready to react if needed. The fight may seem daunting at first glance, but looks can be deceiving. If you enjoyed this guide or found it helpful, remember to bookmark us at LearntoRaid.com, subscribe to us on YouTube, Blip TV, and follow us on Justin TV and Twitter. As always, thanks for checking us out here at Learn to Raid, and we'll see you at the next boss.
I wasn't feeling so good. I just didn't feel like playing anymore. So I went home, and I got all comfy and cozy and all scrunched up in front of my phonograph. And I sat there